3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country...
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
All action.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
In May of 2023, a man named Daniel Penny boarded a subway car in New York City. During transit, a man named Jordan Neely began to threaten Penny and the other passengers on the car. Expressing a desire to defend himself and others, Penny, a former Marine, put Neely in a chokehold until the train arrived at the next station. Shortly after the incident ended, Neely, unfortunately, died. New York has brought a criminal case against Daniel Penny. The highly publicized trial concluded yesterday in Manhattan, with the jury delivering a verdict of not guilty. Because of the immediate nature of the event, we've decided to bring Heritage Explains to you a bit early this week. I sat down with Cully Stimson, Senior Legal Fellow here at the Heritage Foundation, to discuss the case. He's a lawyer, but also a former prosecutor and judge, so it would be hard to find someone more qualified to shed light on Daniel Penny's exoneration and why it matters for Americans. Cully Stimson, welcome back to Heritage Explains.
Always a pleasure.
As of this recording, we have just received word that a verdict has been rendered in the much talked about Daniel Penny case in New York. For people who have maybe not been paying attention to this, or maybe it has fallen off their radar, can you tell us who is Daniel Penny? Why is he in court?
Daniel Penny is a former Marine. He's a civilian, and last year, when he was on a New York City subway, he saw a deranged, erratic young man named Jordan Neely. He didn't know him, acting crazy on the subway, yelling and screaming, threatening to kill people, saying that he doesn't care if he goes to jail, he's going to kill somebody. He was acting like a nut job. And Daniel Penny took it upon himself to protect and defend the other people he was threatening, restrained him for a number of minutes, took him to the ground. It was videotaped. Eventually, the police came when the subway car stopped, and later, this young man who had a long criminal history died. In the meantime, Daniel Penny was interviewed by the police. He waived his Miranda rights, talked about how he was trying to protect himself and mainly other people from this person. And while he was being interviewed, he did not know that the young man had died. Alvin Bragg's office brought 2 charges against him. One was a second-degree voluntary manslaughter, which requires you to believe that what you did was dangerous and that it would cause somebody potentially to die. And then the lesser included offense, which is criminally negligent homicide, which is essentially that you acted in a reckless, inattentive, or careless way, and that resulted in the death of somebody. Today, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty on the lesser included offense.
So I want to talk more about the actual results and maybe why those occurred. But before we do, some facts have come out regarding the case, regarding the cause of death of Jordan Neely, that have shed some light on this case and made it somewhat controversial. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah. First off, every homicide case is a tragedy. All right. It's a tragedy because a person dies. And whether you charge the right person or not, you can never bring that person back to life. And so these cases are serious. It's the most serious type of case you can bring. Important to keep that in mind. Secondly, the accused in every case is presumed innocent. Of course, the press and agitators on the left were convicting Daniel Penny and forgot about that presumption of innocence. But I think your question is hinting at some of the prosecutorial overreach and some of the judicial decisions made in this case. Here, the theory of the prosecution from the very beginning is that what Daniel Penny did, the Marine, was murder, was a form of murder, that he was so damn reckless, so horrible, so over the top, that they were going to charge him with voluntary manslaughter, and, oh, by the way, we'll throw in the lesser included offense of criminally negligent homicide. That's a theory. That's the theory they started with when they did their opening statements. They picked their jury. They went forward with that. The defense put their defense on and said, hey, he was acting like a good Samaritan. He was defending not only himself but mainly others on the subway. And then the judge read the jury their instructions, and they went out and deliberated. Now, like a lot of cases, juries can't get to a verdict. And they came back after a few days of deliberations, and they said, hey, Judge, we can't come to a decision on the top charge, the voluntary manslaughter. At that point, you as a judge, and I was a judge for 5 years doing criminal cases, have a decision to make. You can either encourage him to go back and try a little bit longer, which he did, or you can dismiss the case then and declare a mistrial. He did not do that. Under New York law, he gave them what's called an Allen instruction, which means it's named after a case. Go back and try it a little harder. They did. They came back again, said, hey, Judge, sorry, we just can't come to a verdict on this top charge. At that point, the judge should have declared a mistrial, but he didn't. The government, the prosecutor, took a little time and said, oh, you know what, Judge? We're going to move to dismiss the top charge. Now, what the judge did, the second mistake, is he listened to them, and he granted it. Most judges would have said, look, we're so far down the road here, you're getting a mistrial, and that's the end of it. But he granted their motion. That baked in another appellate issue, and that is a coercive verdict, forcing the jury to focus all their attention on the lesser included offense of criminal negligent homicide. So there are a lot of mistakes that happened here that, had he been convicted, would have resulted in a reversible error and reversible on appeal. So then he gives them the weekend, the jury, tells them to think about it, and they come back in today and they rendered a not guilty verdict, which was the right verdict, because if you look at the statute in New York, to be convicted of criminally negligent homicide, you have to act in a manner that was reckless, inattentive, or careless, and that it caused somebody's death. You didn't have to have the specific intent to kill them. Under New York law, a typical criminally negligent homicide guilty verdict is, let's say you're driving your SUV at a high rate of speed and you're texting. You go off the road and kill somebody. That's been upheld on appeal as a criminally negligent homicide. Or you're operating a train at a high rate of speed and you fail to sufficiently reduce the speed of the train as it approaches a final stop. You blow through it and you kill a bunch of people. That's been upheld on appeal under New York law. Not this. This theory of the case was wrong from the beginning. This is not a criminally negligent homicide. He was not inattentive. He was not careless, and he certainly was not reckless. In fact, he was acting in a careful, deliberate manner to prevent the deaths of other people, or at least that was the defense. And that is a true and complete defense under New York law. So sometimes juries, first off, all jury verdicts should be respected. People have their opinions about it, whether it was a good verdict or not. All jury verdicts should be respected. But here on the merits, I think the jury got it right.
You know, you're a man who has spent a lot of time looking at our criminal justice system. Being a part of the criminal justice system, for those who may not know, you and your colleague Zach Smith wrote a very interesting book called Rogue Prosecutors, all about some of the weird and evil incentives that are at play within our criminal justice system at times. As you're looking at this situation from that lens, what does it make you think about?
Well, I'm glad we wrote one of our 8 chapters on Alvin Bragg, because these Soros rogue prosecutors are pro-criminal, anti-victim, cop-hating zealots. And we laid out in the Alvin Bragg chapter how he looks at the world through race-colored glasses. He hires people who do that. So the prosecutor in this case, for example, completely incorrectly mentions the race of the decedent numerous times in front of the jury when she was arguing to keep the case going and then dismiss the top charge. That was reversible error in and of itself, but this is the type of people they hire. And so there's 2,300 elected DAs around the country, as we mentioned. There's about 70 or so Soros bought and paid for rogue prosecutors. Alvin Bragg is a Soros-inspired prosecutor. Look at the person he put on this case to prosecute this case. I'm glad this nightmare is over for Daniel Penny on the criminal side. The decedent's family is suing him civilly, just like in the OJ decision where he was found not guilty of the murders, which he actually did, and then sued civilly, and he was held civilly liable. Daniel Penny is going to have to go through the court process on the civil side as well. And when I say OJ did it, a lot of people believe he did it. He's never come out and said he did it, and that's just the opinion of other people. I'll reserve judgment on one way or the other. But the fact remains that Alvin Bragg's in office, and he has these policies which have resulted in crime going up, and in the cities that have had these rogue prosecutors, crime has exploded. It's the reason that there's a big backlash, Mark. I mean, you saw George Gascon get booted out of office by the voters in L.A. County, and a new guy put in last week. You've seen Kim Foxx be replaced. She was the first rogue prosecutor in Chicago. You saw the voters in San Francisco yank Chesa Boudin in the special election. You saw the voters up the city in Baltimore not reelect Marilyn Mosby, and then she gets convicted by the Fed for being a fraud and a federal liar. You see Rachel Rollins up in Boston, one of the other people we wrote about in the chapter, resign in disgrace for being a disgrace. And you see Kim Gardner in St. Louis resign in disgrace for being a disgrace. So six of the eight people we wrote about in our eight chapters are now out of office. Uncle Larry up in Philadelphia is still in office, but it looks like a sitting judge and retired military officer who sits on the court in Philadelphia is going to run against him. He's about ready to resign, and he's going to run against him, and I think Uncle Larry is going to lose his seat if that campaign goes well. Alvin Bragg's the last man standing in our book. I think this is a case that shouldn't have been brought in the first place, and I think this will embolden people to run against him because he's been a disgrace as a DA.
One of the concerns that I've seen around this particular case is if the jury had come back with a guilty verdict, when a similar situation happens next week, a group of people are sitting on a train, someone comes on and starts to act threatening toward them. There is someone with some military or police or other sort of training sitting in the corner, and they take no action because they could be the next Daniel Penny. Do you think that this verdict gets us any closer to people being able to take heroic action if necessary?
The New York Police Department is the largest police department in the country. They have police officers on the subway all the time. They can't be on every train, on every stop. They do a great job. And I hope that this verdict, regardless of how it came out, doesn't result in the losing side, the perceived losing side here, the people who are advocating for the decedent to do anything unlawful, riot. I think that if the verdict had come out and he was guilty, I think people on the side of Daniel Penny certainly would not have done that. They would have been disappointed and angry and worked on the appeal. But I don't think you want people taking law in their own hands. We are a country of laws, and the Daniel Pennys of the world who see a perceived threat and see people threatened like they were are going to stand up and prevent other people from being harmed. And that's the way, law-abiding Americans do. When they see somebody else who can't defend themselves be threatened with death, they're going to do that. But I don't think we should encourage people to do that. At the same time, we should not discourage people from doing that. We should let people use their own best judgment. But had he been convicted, to your point, it would have dissuaded a lot of people from using their common sense, right? And you have a lot of civil organizations out there that patrol the subways above and beyond what the police do. And, as New York City Mayor Eric Adams said recently, we have a huge number of untreated mental health issues. Some of those people get on the train. It's scary going on the New York City subway. It's a massive mass transit system. I mean, I'm sure you've been there many times. I used to work in New York City. And you see people with big problems who are threatening and scary. But I hope that people don't take this as a green light to act out and play pseudo police officer. But at the same time, if you or your friends or other people are being threatened by somebody, I think this kind of verdict, some people will think that, well, I'll be immunized from this. Remember, he was prosecuted. He had to spend a lot of money defending himself. I'm sure his life has been hell. And I'm sure he's not going to enjoy this civil suit. So I think people need to use their common sense, regardless of what the verdict was today.
Cully Stimson, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Cully Stimson for his contribution to today's episode. You can follow Cully on X at Cully Stimson, and you can find a link to Cully's book, Rogue Prosecutors, in the show notes below. And of course, thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. You can reach out to us with thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Ghani, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.